content creators think this huge company spends millions of dollars on advertising. I only want them to give me 10,000. That should be super simple. But the reality is that when you're looking at brand dollars, those agencies are planning really far out, and they have a very specific plan about where they want all of their dollars to go. Trying to convince a brand that they should be investing in podcasting is a job, but then getting that brand convinced to advertise on this particular podcast is also a job.
Welcome to PodBiz, the money behind the mic, where we get into the business of podcasting. I'm Norma Belenky, a podcast and media strategist.
And I'm Kiernan. I'm a podcast producer, and we're asking the question that's on everyone's mind. Where is the money in podcasting?
Each week, we talk with podcast industry professionals, marketers, and creators who are turning podcasts into a thriving business and making the industry what it is today.
With real revenue, real strategies, and real results.
If you're looking to grow or scale your show, and of course monetize, you're in the right place.
So let's get down to PodBiz.
Today we're speaking with Heather Osgood, CEO of True Native Media. We'll be speaking today about how podcasters are becoming content creators, the long-tail aspect of branded podcast partnerships and advertising, and the minimum amount of downloads podcasters need for agency representation. Let's get down to PodBiz. Hi, Heather. Welcome to PodBiz.
Thanks for having me on.
We're so excited to have you today. So first off, straight off the bat, Heather Osgood, where's the money in podcasting?
In advertising, of course.
So tell us a little bit about, what you guys do at True Native Media, because you have this advertising agency that started out many years ago when podcasting was still niche, and you've really grown it into an incredible business.
So I founded True Native Media in January of 2016, and I started the company because I started listening to podcasts, and back then it was still kind of early days in podcasting. I know it depends a lot on when you hopped in, but there were so many podcasts out there that didn't have ads on them, and I knew that I could help creators monetize their content. I knew that these people were really good at researching and creating entertaining, engaging content. But when it comes to sales, that was, really a whole other, skill set. And so I started the company with this idea of helping content creators. And now it's been almost 10 years, which is kind of crazy, 9.5 now. And we've really grown the agency from working with smaller kind of independent content creators to larger shows. And our role really is just to help content creators monetize their podcast. And, as we've grown in the industry, we're also looking at what does their social media look like? What does their YouTube channel look like? So it's really kind of, I would say, blossomed from a sole podcaster into a content creator.
I think we're seeing that with creators across the industry, right? It's not just your podcast footprint, it's your YouTube footprint, it's your social footprint, it's your email newsletter footprint. And so we're seeing that diversity of platform across the industry as creators grow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for me, that's been the most interesting piece is that you can be a really strong podcaster and you can use that. And we use that as kind of the tent pole of our agency. We're always going to start with audio first, but video has been a huge topic of conversation in the last year and a half or so. So many people are, listening/watching podcasts on YouTube. And so really being able to monetize across all platforms is important. And it's also really helpful for advertisers because they see a really nice lift when they do create these campaigns that are across multiple channels.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's also one of those things where with True Native, you guys really started out as a boutique agency, right? You started out working with creators that were indie and you saw their potential. And then you really kind of bootstrap them and, use your sales expertise, which we'll talk about in a bit. But to really build up their podcast. And then eventually, as the industry grew, True Native, your company grew as well.
Yeah, it's been really fascinating. What I have liked most about the podcast industry is that we never sit still. I know you can agree with that, but there's always something new that is on the horizon, something that is, challenging us as an industry to really improve. But we've worked on that at our company level too. How can we service our podcasters and content creators in a bigger way to make sure that we, really are kind of that sales arm for them, where we're helping them to monetize their content. And, one of the things that I think is really important with content creators is you kind of have to start with that build your audience piece and get a really nice, solid audience. And then once those content creators have that solid audience, we're there to help grow their show from a monetization perspective. And we primarily work with host-read kind of endorsement style ads, but we also are finding that as programmatic ads, which are those announcer reads that you hear, I think across the industry, we're, just constantly hearing more and more of that. So, really looking for us at the solid base of host-read ads. I think that as a listener, most people, of course, prefer that host-read ad. You're going to have a better result with a host-read ad, but when we can sprinkle in the programmatic as well, I always look at it as like we're going to put in those programmatic ads to backfill impressions that we weren't able to sell with host reads. It really kind of helps round out a whole monetization strategy through advertising for our partners.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everybody listening, when we're talking about programmatic, that's ads that are served in near real time. So it's server to server communication in microseconds to insert an ad as you're listening to the podcast. As you're downloading it. So it's definitely an amazing use of unmet inventory. And you also mentioned, as the creator footprint has grown, right, from audio to audio video to now socials, are you guys selling across the different platforms as well? I know you're audio first, but do you incorporate that into your offering for sponsors?
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably one of the bigger initiatives for us at True Native right now is how do we grow beyond just that podcaster? Again, for us, if somebody came to me and said, hey, I've got like a great TikTok account, do you want to sell it? I would say no. We're always going to start with that audio host first. But when the audio host has a really strong audience in other, on other platforms, for us trying to monetize that for them is really important because, again, we want that integration. We want that audience member to hear about it on the podcast and see it in social media and read about it in newsletters. So when we can create that really creates great results for the advertiser. We still really are working with a lot of direct response advertisers. So they're really wanting kind of that instant conversion, and being able to get ads across platforms has been helpful for us. And so, yeah, would I say that the bulk of what we're selling is these integrated campaigns? No, we're still selling, a ton of podcast ads. That's our, meat and potatoes right now, but we are working to grow beyond that and really to do more of those integrated campaigns.
With founding True Native in 2016, what was your background that brought you into the podcasting industry?
So I started my career in radio ad sales. So I did radio ad sales, I did newspaper sales, and then I actually owned a trade show production company for about 10 years. And in that business, it was ad sales too, because I would rent a building and I would sell booth spaces to have kind of that one-to-one, face-to-face advertising conversion for small businesses. And when I sold that company, I started listening to podcasts, and all of a sudden I was like, wait, there's something here. I feel like there's a real opportunity. And at that time, I think a lot of people were like, what? Podcast? Like it was still, I love to think back to those days because that first year when I did sales calls, literally I would call businesses and say, hey, do you want to buy podcast advertising? And people would say, wait, what's a podcast? And I'm like, uh-oh, am I going down the wrong path? Did I pick the wrong option? But I think it helped to have that sales background. Being from media sales, I knew that there was something in podcasting, and it's obviously proven to be true.
Yeah, absolutely. In 2016, podcasting was still fringe. It was still pretty niche.
It was, yeah. I remember I was, kind of looking for what my next thing would be. And one day my husband's like, have you ever listened to a podcast? And I was like, no, those are way too much work, because at that time, the first podcast I had listened to, you literally had to download the audio file onto your computer. You had to upload it to like your MP3 device. And I'm like, that is way too much. And my husband's like, no, look, there's this app on your phone. All you have to do is click it and there's all these podcasts. And I was like, wait, what? Like, I just remember like back to that day of seeing that podcast app on my Apple phone and being like, oh my gosh, this is pretty cool. What is out here? But yeah, it was early days. And when we look at how much the industry has changed over the course of the last 10 years, I think that we should all be proud, but also realize that there is still so much opportunity. And, when we compare the quantity of podcasts out there, I think there's about 4 million podcasts right now. And I think a lot of times people are like, oh my gosh, I'm too late. Like, I can't actually grow a show. But it's not true. You really still can grow a show. And there still is so much opportunity in this industry, I believe.
When you look at the numbers, there may be 4 million podcasts that exist, but the amount of podcasts that are currently active is very different. The amount of podcasts that have more than 6 episodes is very different. So that's only a piece of the pie. So very important to remember as well. There's still room for everybody. Thanks for joining us here on PodBiz. If you're liking the show, please subscribe and write us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other podcast pros find the show. Thanks so much. And back to PodBiz. What's one key move or metric or even mindset that made the biggest impact on your podcasting career and growing True Native to what it is today?
Really just that mindset of knowing that there is more opportunity. For me as just an entrepreneur, I've always been able to see where there is a chance for me personally to grow, for the company to grow. One of our core values as a company is innovation and relevance. And, being in a trade show company, I remember thinking, gosh, this industry is really not going to be the same. And we put on home and garden events. So it wasn't like we were putting on huge corporate trade shows. They were very local. And I just remember thinking like, this isn't going to last forever. Like people aren't going to come to an event to learn about contractors and roofers and landscapers. And it's true, right? I mean, people turn to so many other educational avenues now than they did when I was doing that. And I just remember leaving that business thinking, I never want to have a company where I'm not really putting a lot of effort into innovation and relevance. And so for me, in terms of growing True Native Media, it's been really important to say, what is the next thing and not stay kind of stagnant in like, oh, this is what we always do. So, for instance, when I started, all ads in podcasts were embedded or baked into the episode. And there was a time when dynamic ad insertion started to become more prevalent, and our agency partners said, we will never buy dynamically inserted ads. And I remember thinking, oh, shoot, I better stay away from that. But I really saw the opportunity. And the value of dynamic ad insertion is that you have the ability to insert ads through your full catalog of episodes. And it doesn't matter when that podcast episode was released, it matters when someone's listening to it. So, if I'm listening to a podcast today that was produced 3 months ago or 3 years ago, I can get served an ad. And I really saw the opportunity in that and really moving to more impression-based selling as opposed to download. And there's still so much talk and kind of controversy around like what's more effective. Are baked in ads more effective than dynamically inserted? There are still companies out there who will not buy dynamically inserted ads. They only want to buy baked in ads. And the reality is that that's not where the industry is headed. And there are so many things like that, right? Pixel tracking, I think now, being able to grow into video and what's happening in the video space. So it's really important that you're always trying to stay one step ahead of what's happening as an industry so that you can grow with the times.
Absolutely. I mean, especially as the industry is so young, the technology is consistently evolving, right? The one thing we know is that we aren't where we're going.
That is true. That is absolutely true.
Yeah. Well, Heather, what's something that people don't know about what you do?
So I think that what people don't know is that getting advertisers is much more difficult than you would think it would be. So I feel like I always crack up because podcasters will come to us and they'll say, well, that company has so much money. Like I hear Toyota advertising on all these podcasts. Like they should just advertise on my show. Or I really love Nike. You should just go get Nike to advertise on my show. But the reality is that it is much more difficult, especially difficult to get brand dollars. And I think that content creators often think like, this huge company spends millions of dollars on advertising. I only want them to give me 10,000. Like that should be super simple. But the reality is that when you're looking at brand dollars, number one, those agencies are planning really far out. Number one. And number two, they have a very specific plan about where they want all of their dollars to go. And even just as an industry trying to convince a brand that they should be investing in podcasting is a job. But then getting that, brand convinced to advertise on this particular podcast is also a job. And really, like I mentioned, that timeline, if I start calling on Toyota today, I'll be lucky if I get them to place ads on your show next year, not like in a month or 2 months. And I think that there is definitely a misconception out there, or a perception that as soon as I sign with a rep firm next month, my podcast should be full of ads. And of course, it's our job to make sure that we've got relationships with lots of people, right? From those brand advertisers to the direct response advertisers to the brand direct deals. We're working with smaller companies. And obviously there are companies out there that are going to say like, give me anything you got that's new that we can test for next month or next quarter. So there are those short-term deals that can come quickly. But I think that there is definitely a misperception that getting a big brand deal should be relatively easy, and it's really not.
Yeah, and first of all, we're dealing with budgets, right? So we're dealing with big agency budgets, big agency timelines, right? And we both can speak to this, but in terms of both the professional experience we've had, the larger the company, the slower it moves, right? It's not a sailboat, it's not a speedboat. The larger the company, when you're talking about big agencies, when you're talking about Fortune 500 companies, those companies are cargo ships, right? They move slow and they move big. And so you better be aware that they're coming when it is time for budget, but also it's inch by inch.
It is. That's a really good, I think, comparison. It just takes time, and you put the time in and you get the result. But I think that as a content creator with advertising in general, it's important to realize that you do need to have a sizable audience. I think that I have conversations with content creators pretty frequently where, they'll say, I'm getting 100 downloads an episode. And I want to say that is amazing, because it's not easy to get 100 downloads an episode. It's also just not sellable. If you want to monetize your podcast with advertising, you have to have a sizable audience. And that's an important thing for you to keep in mind. Now, if you are just an independent person and you're creating a podcast for veterinarians and you want to go to the Veterinarian Association and find all of these niche products that are selling software just to veterinarians, yeah, they might pay you a whole lot of money for 100 downloads or 1,000 downloads because those are very high ticket people that are going to make high ticket purchases. So there is money to be had there for sure. But when you want to jump into kind of the realm of representation and having an outside company sell ads on your behalf to monetize your show, you need to have an audience that is going to be sizable, that's going to really move the needle for advertisers.
Absolutely. And when we're talking about that size of audience, what's an approximate number of downloads that somebody who's found our show, who's watching, is thinking, okay, what's a goal that I need to get to before I can talk to agencies?
So we currently are taking on shows who have 100,000 downloads per month. for representation. So that's kind of the bar that we have set. That being said, there are a lot of representation agencies out there. There's also really great platforms like Libsyn Ads and Gumball, Red Circle, where you can go and list your podcast on those platforms. And my recommendation is if you want to list your show on a platform and you have, I would say, like 5,000 downloads per month. And again, we're talking about through all of your episodes. If you're getting about 5,000 downloads per month, that's when I would probably go and list my show on one of those platforms. If you're looking for like individualized representation, I would aim for more like 25 to 50. And to be fair, if you have 5,000 downloads per month, you're not going to make a lot of money on those platforms. I mean, you maybe might make $100, $200, $300 a month, but it could pay for your hosting bill. It could pay for your production. So, but once you get, I would say that 25,000 plus number per month, I think that there's a lot more opportunity for your show.
Yes, when you're looking at a specific niche, right? A lot of the time we hear dentists. Like if you have a podcast about dentistry, like start counting money, right? Because dentists want to advertise on podcasts, right? So I think if you have a specific niche that is incredibly valuable, right? Within a certain professional niche, right? You can expound on that niche. But in terms of number of downloads, that's really helpful to know what those metrics are. If you're indie, if you're doing it yourself, 5,000. If you're looking for representation, anywhere from 25 to 50. You want to work with Heather, get to 100.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think that we always look at these really kind of niche things and we're like, oh yeah, there's a gold mine there. But that comes with, you're going to have to go do the sales. Like there isn't,
You better be a dentist that knows all the other dentists.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. There isn't like really a rep firm out there that's going to sign you up and like say, oh yeah, we're going to go find these advertisers. Like you're going to personally need to go out there and hustle. But that can be very worth it, just depending on your own personal skill set and what you've got going on.
If you had to start over again today, is there anything you'd do differently to grow faster or smarter?
Yes. What I would do is I would start the technology side of our company sooner. So we have at True Native Media been a very service-based business, which is amazing. And I love service-based businesses. But we are currently working on technology to help support our business as well as the industry. And if I could go back 5, 10 years, I would definitely start with technology in mind first and build with that. I think that really, number one, helps, technology helps everyone and helps run businesses better. And there's also just a lot of value in terms of the overall acquisition value of your business when you have technology.
When you say technology, do you mean building technology into how you guys do business and serve ads?
Not necessarily from an ad serving perspective, but more from an operational perspective. So part of the reason that we have struggled in the podcast ad sales space is the technology has not kept pace with other media buying platforms. So for instance, it's much easier for large companies and large agencies to go out and buy any sort of digital advertising or to buy social media advertising. To be honest, it's even easier to buy like CTV and, just traditional television and traditional radio. We haven't made it super easy for buyers to buy podcast advertising. And that's part of the reason that I think the evolution of the industry has been a little slower going. So for me, if I could go back, and something we're working on today, but if I could go back and do it sooner, I would try to create an easier technology path for buyers to access the inventory.
What within the podcasting industry are you most excited about coming up?
Really excited about us kind of breaking through to the other side from being podcasters to content creators. So, I talked about this at the beginning, but for me, I have really stopped referring to our podcasters as podcasters, and I've started referring to them as content creators because, as I mentioned, I really do believe that there is so much opportunity when we look at the entirety of an audience that someone is building and not just podcasts. The other thing that is really important to me is that we look at our podcasters as influencers. So I believe that as we're looking to more video integration and more social media integration, that we're going to make that transition from podcasters being podcasters into content creators, and most importantly, into influencers, which will open up so many more ad dollars for us.
Well, Heather, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on PodBiz.
Thank you for having me.